Hi, everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Flock Talk. I'm Robin Sullivan of the Leather Elves, and clearly we're getting in the Thanksgiving spirit here at the Leather Elves. So, I'm glad you guys all tuned in tonight because I'm going to do a little bit of Thanksgiving prep, and we're going to talk about feasting with your flock. So, the really exciting part is that we have a special guest chef who I'm going to talk to in a little bit. But I wanted to show you some of the things that I have in my kitchen and talk about how you might want to prepare some of them and why some of them are good. Obviously, we want to spend some time with our birds. If our birds are tolerant of our company and they're okay with all of that, then we need to figure out what's okay for them to eat. Because as much as I love pie, I don't think pie is what we want to be sharing. As much as I love stuffing, stuffing is not what we should be sharing. There are definitely so many great Thanksgiving foods and harvest foods that we can share with our birds. So tonight we're going to talk about some of those and how you'd prepare them and some of the vitamins that come with those foods. So the first one I want to talk about is squash. We've got all different kinds of squash. People do different things. Oh, and wait, I should probably say the squash with marshmallows, that's not the one we want to share with our birds. Okay. We want to share the plain squash before we put, before we boil it to mush, before we, before we put all the fun spices in it, before we put salt and pepper and butter. Before we do those things is when we want to share the squash. And there are some different kinds of squash that I want to show you. And so I'm going to move my bowl here that's got all of our holiday foods in them. And I'm going to grab my knife. I know it's scary. You guys didn't know that I did that. You knew that I worked with leather cutters and things like that, but giant knives, I don't know. So the first one we're going to talk about is the acorn squash. And I'm not going to cut this one, but we're going to talk about it. So this, can you guys see that? This is a white acorn squash. And all you need to do to prepare this one is just cut it in half and scoop out all the insides. I'm going to make squash with a sausage stuffing, not for Thanksgiving, but just for general purposes. And but this is one squash that is really a great option for you and for your birds. And so you're healthy, your birds are healthy. It's a win-win situation. The next squash we're going to talk about is butternut squash. You guys see that? There we go. So we've got butternut squash, and this is a baby butternut squash. There are only two of us in the house, so I don't need the great big ones. You can buy the great big ones if that works for you. What I suggest with these, so these are kind of tough to peel. What I suggest is you take your knife and very carefully cut off the top. Okay? You don't want to waste too much, so just cut off a little piece. And then you're going to take your peeler, just a hand peeler, nothing special. I do this towards me. Not the safest way to peel, but it is reality. So we want to do this. We want to peel off this skin. The skin's pretty thick, but we want to peel that all off. Here we go. And excuse me for not paying attention, but I don't want to cut my fingers off. It wouldn't be good. It'd be tough to make toys that way. So we're going to peel the butternut squash. Once we get it all peeled, all of this will be gone. You want to very, very carefully, you guys see that? Move that a little closer. You want to very, very carefully cut down the center. Have a nice sharp knife. So now you've got to cut down the center. You want to scoop out all of this. Okay. I will tell you that squashes, like in their whole form, are a great way to offer foraging. So if you've got a bird that might be a little iffy about whether they're going to eat these new foods that you're showing them, if they are new foods, then you might want to put something they're familiar with. And these are almost like a little bowl. Okay. They've got this little indentation here. And once I'll get a spoon. Hold on. You're getting a spoon. This happens to be Leather Elves kitchen, also known as my kitchen and Mark's kitchen. And it's clean. Well, you can't see all of it, but hey. So we're going to take this and scoop out these seeds. Okay. And once you get them scooped out, there you go. You've got that little bowl. This is a great opportunity for birds that may not be so excited about new foods, may not be so excited about squash. You put a favorite food in here, I guarantee you they're going to figure out that the squash is a good thing to eat as well. So, little foraging tip that goes with butternut squash and the nutritional value. So, squash is kind of chock full of vitamins. It's vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C, and vitamin E are all available in squash. So it's a really good option if you're looking for something to kind of boost that vitamin intake for your birds. And we're going to talk to the chef about that later on, but that person is much more knowledgeable about this than I am, but and can give you the science behind it. But right now we've got our hollowed out butternut squash. If you're not going to leave it whole like this, I suggest just chopping it. You can take it, cut it like that. Cut it in pieces. And once you've got those pieces, they're ready for your bird. For you, if you're looking for a really cool way to cook butternut squash this year, if you're tired of mushy butternut squash, which I know I am, you can take this and roast it. Throw it in some for you, not for your bird. Throw it in some olive oil, some spices, and roast it in the oven. And you'll have a yummy offering for your Thanksgiving feast. All right, cooking show. I've always wanted to do a cooking show. How fun is that? All right, let me just get rid of some of this over here. See, the problem is with a real cooking show, I'd have an assistant who is doing all the dishes. Oh, well, it happens. Okay, so another kind of squash that I want to talk to you guys about is a delicata squash. This is a delicata squash. When you cut the delicata, this is even harder to cut than the butternut. When you cut the delicata, you cut it in circles, okay? And then down the center is where you'll find the seeds. You just want to cut those out, okay? But the delicata squash is also another great option, real healthy vegetable for you and for your birds. All right, so I'm hoping that you're having apple pie because I know I'm having apple pie. And I've got bags and bags of apples. It's fall in the Northeast, or if you're in the Northwest, even better, because now you're in apple country. But we've got all kinds of apples, and what are we going to do with them? So apples do have, some sugar. So you don't want to, it's not tons and tons of apples. But when you're eating your pie and you're feeling guilty because you don't have a parrot pie, then what you can do is give your parrot some fresh apples. I would suggest organic, just because it's a little bit better. But different varieties have different flavors. They are high in antioxidants, and they also have flavonoids in them. So definitely, a positive food for your birds. Make sure you cut the seeds out. Simple. Okay. You'll notice too that I'm doing a lot of big pieces. When you're offering fresh food, offering it in tiny diced up pieces it might make you feel better. It makes you feel like you're being a better parrot, mom or dad, because you're spending all that time creating this food for your birds. But in the wild, and I've said this 1,000 times, any of you that have heard me speak before on how to present different food items, there's no one out in the wild cutting things up into tiny pieces. So you really want to think about offering bigger chunks that they need to manipulate, they need to work on. And if you don't have the space for that, or it's not in the budget, you don't want to put something in there if you know that they're not going to eat the whole thing. That's okay too, but I still suggest offering as big a piece as you can, so that as long as it's healthy, so that they can have to manipulate it. You can add different food items together, and put a divot in the side of an apple piece, and put a nut in there. You know, be creative. I know you're being creative with your Thanksgiving for your family and friends. You can be just as creative for your parents. Okay, so we've got some apples there. Apples, all different varieties. This one is a Cortland. This one doesn't even have a name yet. It's from a local orchard, and it tastes a little bit like a pear. It's kind of cool. So we've got apples. We're doing apples. And again, I'm sure you have some around your house. And we're not talking about the canned apple filling from the store, because if you're cheating when you're making your pies, that's not what you want to share with your birds. You want to go out and get a fresh apple and let them have that. So I saved the best for last, in my opinion. This is one of my favorite holiday foods, and it's also one of my favorite enrichment foods for parrots. So when I was a girl, a long time ago, this is showing everybody how old I am. When I was little, I remember I couldn't wait for Thanksgiving because I got to have pomegranates. You guys have ever seen a pomegranate? I'm going to move some of these out of the way. So this is a pomegranate. Okay, this is a fairly small one, but you could only get them at Thanksgiving when I was young. And now they're available much longer season. Their growing season is September to November, but a lot of times you can find them in stores prior to that, or all the way into January, February. And certain stores, I've seen them year round, but they're probably not as fresh as you would like them to be. So pomegranates, when you give a pomegranate, be prepared to look like there's been a massacre in your cage. And a lot of people I know buy a bunch of pomegranates, go through, and when you cut them, I'm going to put it flat this way. When you cut them, I'm so excited when we're done with this. I'm gonna have pomegranate seeds. You can pick them out, okay? You can pick out the little seeds and the pieces, and they're individually. Can you guys see that? They look like that, okay? They're just these little tiny red pieces. And the thing with that is, you can go through all this effort, put them on a cookie sheet if you want, so you have them all year round, or you can freeze them. You can buy them taken out of the fruit itself in the grocery store. I learned that last week from one of our listeners. You can cheat that way, and I'm highly, what's the word I'm looking for? I really do appreciate that cheat factor sometimes, because we don't all have a ton of time all the time. So cheating is allowed. But you can go through this way, and you can feed them as the tiny pieces. Or the way I like to do it, you know me, I got to get them to work, right? So cut a chunk. Cut a chunk like this. Either put it in the bowl, or affix it to the side of the cage. If you've got like an old millet holder or something like that, you can use that to hang this up. And then they have to work to get them out. Okay, that was half the fun when I was a kid, was working to get them out of the fruit itself. So, yay, so exciting and yummy. Pomegranates. Pomegranates are high in antioxidants, and they are also anti-inflammatories. So this is another great option for your birds. One other food that I don't have here with me are carrots. So carrots are something that a lot of people serve on Thanksgiving, and carrots they're super high in vitamin A. And the other thing is, if you look at the colors that we've got out here, we've got the reds of the pomegranate. We've got, the reds and the bright white of an apple. We've got, all the different colors of an acorn squash, the beautiful orange of the butternut squash. All of those colors are attractive to your birds. So now you're providing visual and dietary and perhaps foraging all in one sweep. So that's it for me from here in the Leather Elves kitchen. I want to thank you again for putting up with my average culinary skills. But we will, like I said, we'll be talking with our guest chef shortly, and I'm sure he'll have a lot of great information for you. So happy Thanksgiving from the Leather Elves. We really are blessed and thankful for having all of you as part of our audience. So keep listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Happy Thanksgiving. This week I have a special shout out. It's to two of my youngest and a couple of my favorite neighbors, Natalie and Parker. And Natalie and Parker, I know that you're learning about parrots and how to take care of them, but I also know that you always eat healthy food. And so tonight we're going to talk about some of those healthy foods that you might get to share on Thanksgiving. So we'll see you guys on Saturday for Friendsgiving.
Yes.
All righty. So I promised you guys that I would have a guest chef, and I am pleased to announce that that is Dr. Jason Crean. For those of you that don't know Jason, which I find that hard to believe, Jason is a biologist, an educator, a consultant, and now chef. You can add that to your resume. Just saying.
Bird chef, because I can't cook for myself to save my life.
Bird chef. So Jason, when he consults, he specializes in raw whole food nutrition, and he is with St. Xavier University, where they're the newly launched animal nutrition lab. So that's very exciting. Jason,
focus on avian nutrition.
Say that again.
Focus on avian nutrition.
There you go. So what's going on with that? That's kind of exciting.
Yeah, we launched it over the summer and are collecting funding now, and are working on some different research protocols that we're going to hopefully launch in 2023.
Nice. If people want to learn more about that, how can they do that?
You go to SXU for St. Xavier University, sxu.edu. And search for biology nutrition lab, and it should come up.
Excellent. All right. So if you guys are interested, you can definitely take a look at that, and I would suggest it. So I showed my kitchen skills, which are minimal at best, and I didn't cut off any fingers, so this is a good thing. But Jason, the reason I wanted to have you with us tonight was to kind of go over the nutritional side of what I talk to people about. So before we get started, though, I want to say, if you are going to feast with your flock, this is all contingent on whether your birds are comfortable with your company. I think, Jason, we've all seen those birds that are forced into doing things, and that's the last thing we want to do. It's not going to make your holiday any better. It's not going to make your bird's holiday any better. And it's probably not going to make your guest's holiday any better. A trip to the ER because someone has no idea how to be around a bird is probably not what you want to do on Thanksgiving. So just that caution. And the other caution is, I mentioned last week some pitfalls to when you're cooking. You've got open pans with boiling water. You've got hot burners. You've got the flat tops. Flat tops for me are really difficult with birds because it looks like just a flat landing surface. At least if you've got the burners, maybe they will figure it out. But with a flat top, it looks just like more countertop. So just be careful with that, having your birds out when you're cooking. And also, I know a lot of people share their dining space with their birds on a regular basis. For Thanksgiving, just be sure your guests are comfortable with that, because it's not going to be pretty if Aunt Susie really freaks out when your bird lands on the table. So I would suggest maybe having a perch nearby, near the table, so they are not coming onto the table. It might just be a little bit more comfortable for those people that are not bird aficionados. So
Yeah, and there's a lot there. And I mean, in both of our work, the hardest animal to train is the bird owner, right? Human behavior. And a lot of us do things that we think are beneficial because they would make us happy. But these are birds, these are not little people. And so you have to take those things into consideration, especially when it comes to food. On the Facebook groups, and Facebook is a war zone when it comes to avian nutrition. I mean, it's amazing the hills that people will die on when it comes to, arguing nutrition. But I see people use the word moderation as an excuse, and that has to stop. Moderation is great with healthy foods so that you're giving your birds a diverse foods and not too much of any one thing. But there's no such thing as moderation with unhealthy food. I'm going to say that again. There is no such thing as moderation when it comes to unhealthy food. Oh, my bird just wanted a taste of mashed potatoes. That's not a healthy food. Loaded with butter and salt and all of like, no. So, no meat, none of those things. Like, really, you really got to hold a hard line, because a single biteful for a bird that's a lot of food for a tiny bird that doesn't weigh much compared to us. So don't think of your bird as people when it comes to feeding. Don't think of your bird as a child or anything like that, because you're going to make some poor decisions when it comes to feeding. So, you got to keep that in mind. Cranberries, it should be a whole cranberry, like a real cranberry, not a canned cranberry. That's not, no, no. They don't need it. They can live on healthy food and be just fine. They will not hate you.
And that's the thing too. Well, I'm having this, so he needs to have that. It's not true. And just because of something you put on your Thanksgiving table has squash in it, doesn't mean that now it's healthy because it's got squash in it. Right. You've probably added, or your sweet potatoes. I don't, but I know a lot of people who put that marshmallow on the top. Yeah. I'm not a fan, but a lot of people do it. So suddenly those sweet potatoes that are like, woohoo, now have marshmallow on them, and they're not a healthy food any longer. Pecan pie, my favorite, but there's pecans in it, Jason. Come on. It's a good thing.
Pecans are great, but not pecan pie.
So and obviously Jason and I are joking with you guys, but if there's a serious message here that, the other thing you need to do is educate your guests, because a lot of us grew up in families where food is love, right? So now you got all the family, you got, crazy Aunt Susie and, Uncle Bill, and they're all like, oh, I got this piece of chocolate and I think the bird would really like it.
Yeah.
Well, no, the bird wouldn't really he might for a minute. But that's, not what we want to happen. So it's an education opportunity. It's an educational teaching moment. Thanksgiving, believe it or not, is a teachable moment where you talk to your guests about, hey, this is what birds eat. I mean, we all like to talk about our birds, right? You guys have been to conferences, you've been to bird marts. That's what you talk about. And so at Thanksgiving dinner, maybe you have that conversation about what's healthy. What does, whole raw food nutrition mean? And then you can educate, and maybe they'll be like, oh, I need to get a bird. You never know.
Well, and I mean, giving them, and I hear it all the time, like, oh, but my bird loves it. That does not mean, I love chocolate cake, but I can't live on it. And I certainly shouldn't be eating a lot of it in a sitting. And I certainly shouldn't be eating it every day or every week. Right. So you got to keep that in mind. Just because your bird loves it doesn't mean it's healthy for it. It usually means the opposite. Right. But, and a little goes a long way with any food you feed, but there's no such thing as, oh, just a little if it's unhealthy. There's a hard line to be drawn there. And even if you've done it before and the bird was fine, it doesn't mean that in the long term it's going to be. And that's why we're seeing birds with atherosclerosis, like and liver disease and things like that. That's all long term from little mistakes here and there. So yeah, please keep that in mind.
All right. So now we've been the big bad guys. Everybody's like, oh, I'm not going to do
it. You can hate me. It's okay.
I want to give my bird what I want to give them. But so I'm going to go through some of the things that I cut up and talk to people about sharing. And maybe Jason, you can give us a little more insight into why those are some good choices to make. So let's talk about squash. Never thought I'd say that, but let's talk about squash.
So what do you want to talk about? So what did you do?
So I peeled and cut up a baby butternut squash and took the seeds out.
Okay.
So was that a good thing to do?
You don't have to. Squash seeds are completely safe and edible, and provide a whole other level of foraging. So when I get any type of squashes are all berries. There's my education for the night, but so any acorn squash, butternut squash, pumpkin, and then some of the soft-bodied squashes, summer squashes like zucchini and yellow squash. All of those are considered berries, and they are inside and out are 100% edible. Obviously the rinds aren't going to be edible, like digestible or accessible, but it's not going to hurt the bird to have a chew. Or anything like that. But I love to take all of those, scoop out the seeds, mix the seeds with like soaked and sprouted items, pomegranate arils, which I know we're going to talk about because that's the perfect time of year for this. Cranberries, like whole cranberries or cut in half cranberries, things like that I can mix together. And I'll stick it on a skewer for some birds, like my Sirius black palm cockatoo. He loves to forage on a skewer, so I'll put a half of a pumpkin in there, fill it with all kinds of fun stuff, and then that's his meal for the day where he can forage on that. Whole food will not mold or go bad while you're at work. Cooked food will. Cooked food, that's one reason why I cook nothing for the birds. And because just leaving it overnight, you'll see it has some nasty stuff on it if you don't throw it away. So fresh food, whole food generally doesn't go bad that quickly. So half of a squash filled with all kinds of good stuff. Huge win because they can eat the vessel, which is the pumpkin, the squash, whatever you're giving them, and then they can get all the benefits of stuff inside. And I've seen birds who would not touch fresh food, and that was the gateway.
Yeah.
And for my ground birds, because I have quail and Nicobar pigeons and things like that out in my aviary, I'll just throw a half of a pumpkin on the ground, half of a squash on the ground, stuff it with some seeds and things like that. And it's like the Tasmanian Devil cartoons where he gets done with food and just the empty shell is for the squash. So they really get into it. So, but it's got a lot of benefit. Squash is really healthy. It has a lot of benefit to it. It's really low in sugar, but high in fiber, which is that's fantastic. And, we hear of birds, regardless of the diet they're on, dry food wise, people say that, their vitamin A is really low. What can we do about vitamin A? You got to give the whole food sources of vitamin A to get that vitamin A up. And squash is a perfect example of that. So, low in sugar, high in fiber, which does a body good. And then, the beta carotenes that are converted to vitamin A in the body it's one of the best sources for that.
Yeah, I'll be perfectly honest. Part of the reason I peeled it and took the seeds out and cut it up is because I'm cooking for 20 people on Saturday. So I thought I'd get
You're doing God's work. You're doing God's work there.
But I did, suggest that people could use it as a foraging vessel, and it's it's so simple. And then the other side of that is your guests are going to get a kick out of it. Oh, look, he's eating squash just like us. And you go, yeah, but his squash is different. You know, his squash doesn't have the butter and the cinnamon and the nutmeg and all that happiness. But yeah, so
Good. It could have a little bit of that.
it,
Grinding up some Ceylon cinnamon, not cassia cinnamon like what you would get at the grocery store, usually, but picking up some Ceylon cinnamon and mixing that in. A little bit of herb, spice goes a long way with birds. So that's definitely something that you can add to the mix.
yeah, and that, I mean, we've talked on a couple of shows about doing scent trails and things like that, and you can use those same spices that you're using in your cooking, use them as a scent trail. If you need to keep the bird over here, away from the immediate festivities, use a scent trail where they end up at a squash that they can forage in.
Yeah.
So there's definitely ways to be creative with this and not be the big bad guy that's not allowing your bird anything.
And one thing that I know we're going to get question wise is, I heard you have to cook squash. You absolutely do not have to cook anything for your birds that you offer. A lot of people who don't know a lot about nutrition will get on social media and try to scare people so that they can make themselves sound like an expert. We've all encountered it. But I'm here to tell you that yes, it may be more digestible if it's lightly steamed, and you can do that if you want to, but you do not have to do that. The number of birds that Robin and I, and just animals in general, that Robin and I have seen at zoos, worked with at zoos, where we use these types of things for free, contra freeloading and training and enrichment, foraging. Nobody is suffering because they're not cooking squash or sweet potatoes for their birds. So don't worry about that. That it's not a worry. Wash your produce you would anytime, and give it to them raw. It's just fine.
Why add more work on a holiday? You don't have to. What about delicata squash, Jason?
Any of the squashes they're going to have the same basic nutritional value, but they're going to have some will have different textures and some will have different shapes, and colors. So that sometimes and I say this all the time, keeping birds is a scientific experiment that never ends. You have to experiment with what you're putting in front of the bird. And if your bird really likes acorn squash, that's a win, right? It may not like butternut squash, or it only likes butternut squash if it's stuffed full of, dandelion greens, thing that's great this time of year, and super nutritious for birds. But, you got to experiment to see what they'll eat and then try to expand, because that one thing they like may be the gateway to getting them eat a more diverse diet. And so sometimes chunking things, sometimes giving things whole and letting them shred it. I had a macaw that would not touch fruit until I gave it a whole apple on a skewer. And then all of a sudden it was love at first sight. And that was the gateway. So, you got to keep trying. It could take months or years of experimentation, but keep offering those things. One squash that's really beneficial for birds is spaghetti squash. And I think it's because it's so easy to shred. Well, it's like naturally shredded, right? It's like little pasta almost. And so you can totally shred one of those, or pull out the stuff and it comes out as shred, like these little almost, and mix that with other foods. Some birds love it. I have finches that go crazy for it. And I think mainly it's because it's accessible, like it's in bite-sized pieces where they can actually access it, where they can't do that with some of the harder winter squashes.
Oh, that's a cool idea. And, I love the stuffing them with different things, other fresh foods. And I think, you mentioned that some animals won't go for that fresh raw food initially, but if they've got, and so maybe you take a favorite food and you stuff it down in that squash. And then they're like, oh, I found this walnut or this, whatever at the bottom of the squash. I'm going to investigate further. And they learn that that's, a positive experience. So from a behavioral standpoint, if you can get them to investigate further, it's a win.
Yeah.
So my next favorite thing that I cut up was a pomegranate. So you gotta love it. I mean, those are
Yeah, and you obviously didn't do it in that room because I don't see any blood on the walls. So
that's what I said. I'm like, it looks just like, there was a murder in the room. But it's funny because I was talking about how people online are saying, oh, I can go buy the little container of pomegranate. And yeah, you can do that. You can absolutely do that. But my favorite thing to do is to just cut it in half or cut it in quarters, skewer it, and then your birds have to work to get the aerials out. That it's just, it's just another level. And if you're looking for something to keep your bird busy, which, may be the case if you've got company, if you're looking to keep them busy, a pomegranate's a great way to go. So nutritionally, Jason, what are we looking at with pomegranates?
So pomegranates, anything you see that has a really strong color is going to have high levels of antioxidants. And that's one of the reasons why pomegranate juice has caught on so much, because it is really, really beneficial. And antioxidants, they're a little bit hard for me to describe, but basically they go down to the cellular level. All right. All of us are made of cells. All organisms are made of cells. But when there's messes left behind from, the wear and tear that cells go through, we need some molecules that are going to help clean up that mess. Otherwise, your cells can go bad. Premature death, cell death, or cancers and things like that, inflammation basically. And so these have those really beneficial compounds that you'll see it, berries, edible flowers, anything with those strong colors, you're going to have these beneficial compounds that are going to go all the way down to the cellular level and keep those cells healthy. And you've got things like vitamin C. They have a little bit of protein, not much, but you also have some B vitamins in there. You've got, especially, you've got vitamin K, which is not super easy to get in the diet, but a nice big pomegranate is going to give you probably about a third of your vitamin K for the day as a human. So you can imagine what a few arrows out of the pomegranate are going to do for a bird that's small. So a little bit of vitamin E. So there's a lot of different vitamins and minerals that they're going to get out of that. Copper, which is beneficial. Little bit of potassium, some zinc. They're low on iron, so with those iron sensitive species, those are beneficial. My toucans it's the first thing to go, and they're usually blueberry fiends. So definitely a lot of benefits in that little seed.
Cool. And I think you mentioned this is a good time to get them. Their growing season's fairly short, but they have a long shelf life too. So that's just something to consider. And you can freeze them as well. Preferable to feed them when you first open them, but they can be frozen and work just as well.
Yeah,
So,
and I just got a few today actually, and they're like the size of my head. They're enormous. And if you look on YouTube on how to cut a pomegranate, you will save so much bloodshed, or what looks like bloodshed, in your kitchen. And one thing that I do is, usually you have that little top on the pomegranate, and that's where the flower, that's the remnants of the flower grew into this big ovary, which is a fruit. And you just cut the top of that off. And then you look where the veining is of those white, where the white skin is between those segments. and you just kind of cut down there and you can pull them apart. But the best thing I ever learned was you get a great big thing of cold water and you put the pomegranate in the water and you pull all the seeds out. If you're pulling seeds out, you pull all the seeds out underwater so there's no sting or anything like that. And all the seeds then are, in the water, and then you just pour them into a colander and you've got a bunch of seeds. But doing it underwater, oh my God, what a huge, it's so beneficial, so easy. And it literally does nothing but contain the mess.
So yeah, for our friends with those really fancy white kitchens, look at that. You're their new hero.
They don't have to be white, trust me.
So, all right, we're not going to give them apple pie, but we've got a bunch of apples hanging around, right? So how do we feel about that?
Well, and it's funny because I just had a meeting with an agriculture educator recently. We've been working together to help students across the country understand nutrition and understand, how we get the things we get. And there's like 1,000 varieties of apples that have been selectively bred over centuries. I had no idea, because you go to the grocery store and there's like a dozen, right? Mm-hmm. But it's really interesting, and you can do a little bit of research to find out which ones are more tart versus which ones are more sweet. I tend to feed the ones that are more tart over sweet to my birds. But obviously apples have a lot of benefits. You really need to make sure you wash them though. Make sure even organic. The word organic is thrown around in this country, and it's not all it's cracked up to be. So regardless, you always want to make sure you wash your fruit. And I have a green, like a green scrub pad. What is that called? Scotch pad that I just have for my produce. I only use it on my produce. And with apples especially. So with apples, they're high in fiber, and I try to get apples that aren't super ripe. Granny Smith apples are difficult to tell because we've bred them to be green. But no apple that you're going to get in the grocery store actually exists in nature. Like, all of them have been selectively bred by humans for centuries to be, versus the crab apples that you probably have on trees up in Maine, where they're like this big and they're horrible tasting, right? But there's a little bit of protein, but they're going to be higher in carbs, but they do have fiber. Apples do have fiber. So the higher fiber fruits like pears and apples are great, super beneficial. They have, they're going to have antioxidants and things like that are going to be beneficial, but that fiber, one of the reasons I push fiber so much with birds in particular is we know that fiber helps nourish the microbiome. And the microbiome are all those, sometimes we call them gut flora, but they're all that bacteria that naturally exist in the gut. Mm-hmm. And if we don't keep that healthy, the rest of the body is going to respond, and it's not going to be pretty. And bacteria help all organisms regardless. And the research shows us everything from bears and big cats to, different types of birds and cows and, just all these different animals. And fiber definitely is beneficial for those. And that allows them to produce vitamin B12, which, you can't get otherwise in general. So you'll get some vitamin C. It's fairly low calories. So, that's pretty good when it comes to birds that really like them. You'll get a bit of potassium, a little bit of vitamin K, but it's those antioxidants that are going to be really beneficial. So, there's a lot of benefits to apples. Plus, they're crunchy, and a lot of birds like that texture. So that's often, and apples really are kind of universally loved fruit by most birds, whether they're cockatiels or budgerigars from Australia, where they don't eat a lot of fruit in the wild, But this is a fruit that usually is pretty beneficial. And should I address the elephant in the room? No pun
Absolutely.
intended. Apple seeds are not going to kill your birds. So if they accidentally get an apple seed, do not rush to the ER. It's probably not an issue. A lot of myths out there that people push. Should you be feeding your birds apple seeds? No. But if they get one, is it a life or death situation? Absolutely not. So don't panic.
Thank you for that. So carrots are pretty high in sugar, right?
It can be.
Does the benefits of the vitamins that are in a carrot, because when you look at a carrot, and I got to tell you, I've started buying a lot of my produce from an Amish farm, and the woman is fantastic that works there, and their carrots are the most vibrant orange I have ever seen. I'm like, this is how a carrot's supposed to look. I know that they're not, doing any kind of engineering with their fruits and vegetables. And so that color of the carrot kind of, for me, is a flag that says it's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
It balances out, the benefits balance out the fact that they can be a little high in sugar.
Well, so yeah, I mean, they're higher in fiber. They're a taproot. They're a root. So that, and they have a lot of moisture too. So here's the thing. This myth about sugar, that like really occurring sugar in fruits and vegetables is somehow bad for birds, it keeps getting perpetuated, and it's not. And one of the reasons, and I know you preach this, diversity is everything. If you diversify the diet, no matter how healthy something is, it should not make up the predominant part of a diet. There should be diversity. But that being said, sugars, when we hear that, oh, it's sweet, we automatically think it's loaded with sugar. I hear this about grapes all the time, which drives me crazy, because grapes are often a great gateway to get birds eating better foods. Grapes are nutritious. They shouldn't be eating 100 grapes per day, but they're great. They're nutritious. So when we look at nutrition and how fruits and vegetables are evaluated by the USDA, FDA, things like that, when we look at that, it's often per 100 grams. There's 4.7 grams of sugar in 100 grams of carrots. Now, there is no bird that's eating 100 grams of carrot. My God, I mean, most birds don't even weigh that, right? So, and it's the same thing with berries. I've had people say, oh, my vet said not to feed them berries because they're so full of sugar. They're not full of sugar. There's 12 grams of sugar in 100 grams of blueberries. 100 grams. That's like a whole cockatiel full of blueberries. Like, that's not, like, no. So we have to pull back and say, no, like, diversifying the diet is the very best thing you can do. And you're going to stop feeding whole food over one of the nutrients that's in there compared to all the other beneficial things. And carrots is a perfect example. So I wash and peel carrots, because they're in the soil, and it's if the bird got a little bit of soil in it's not going to hurt it, but you want to avoid a lot of additional microbes that they don't need in their food. So, but carrots, they've got some fiber. They've got a lot of water. Like, most of the carrot is water because that's its job, is to absorb moisture. And so if you've ever seen like a freeze-dried carrot or a dehydrated carrot, there's like nothing there, right? It's a very thin chip, because all of the moisture has been taken out. But one of the best parts of the carrot are the tops. Carrot tops, I don't know what about them gets birds excited, but I will take an entire carrot top and hang it, and the finches, canaries, all little birds just seem to go absolutely bonkers for it. And so those carrot tops are super nutritious. They have all kinds of benefits, but those any kind of leafy green is going to carry with it lots of different benefits, including fiber, which is beneficial. So feed the carrot tops and a bit of the carrot itself, and you're good.
Nice. Yeah, and when you're talking about like the volume difference from, in 100 grams of whatever, there's a very minuscule amount of sugar. And I used to talk about, the example I used to use was people would say, well, I'm giving them X amount of grapes, and it was a large amount of grapes. And the way I would tell people was, imagine if there was a chocolate chip cookie that was the size of a banquet table. And you can have that one chocolate chip cookie, but it's the same, kind of analogy that's how much you would be eating. So and again, like I said, a lot of us grew up in homes where food was love. And we've learned better, right? What Laura says, when, we know better, we do better. And I think we need to really think about, okay, the animal is this big, and I don't need to give it the same amount of food that's on my plate. And it doesn't, make that bird any happier. It clearly doesn't make that bird any healthier. And you just need to consider that. So we're going to really shoot for a fresh, this Thanksgiving. Hopefully people, if they're sharing their feast with their flock, they will do that. And don't overdo it. If you present the food that you're feeding while you have guests and things like that, if you present it right in a foraging opportunity, it's going to take them a little bit longer. So it's not like you sit down with your Thanksgiving meal, you hand your bird a bowl of food and it's gone, and now you've got to figure out, what am I going to do for the rest of the meal while the bird's bothering everybody else and me. And so what you want to do is present it in some creative foraging activity, or something they've got to work for, so that it takes them a little bit more time. But I hope, anything else, Jason, as far as do's and don'ts for the holiday feast that you might want to suggest to people?
This time of year, persimmons are available. I just picked up some persimmons today. Feed them ripe and peeled. They love them. Beta carotenes, all kinds of really beneficial nutrients. That's another one that people say, hey, I heard this was toxic. I mean, why would we be eating anything toxic? I mean, it's, avocado is that rarity, right? And that's, I mean, there's birds in the wild eating avocados, but because of how we process avocados for grocery stores, the toxin that's naturally there doesn't leave. So we can't feed avocados to our birds. Please, let me say that again. Do not go on Facebook and tell everybody that I said to feed avocados. Avocados should not be fed to birds in our homes. But that being said, persimmons have a bad reputation, and there's absolutely no reason not to feed persimmons, peeled and ripe.
All right, so lots of options for you guys out there. Jason, I want to thank you for joining me, and I hope that this is helpful for people. We're pre-recorded, but you can leave comment, in the comment section. You can ask questions, and we will get back to them. There was no way I was going to be able to do a live stream Friday night unless my guests are going to be hungry on Saturday. So I'll just tell them, no, I learned all these great ways to feed the food to the birds. So you guys have to go hungry. Yeah, so I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday. Thank you, Jason. Enjoy being warm for the holidays. Again,
I don't miss the snow. And neither do the birds.
It snowed yesterday, but all right, so you guys take care. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and you're feasting with the flock. And thanks, Jason, for joining me. I will see you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye. I want to thank you all again for tuning in and listening and sharing your information with your fellow avian enthusiasts. We are very thankful here at the Leather Elves for all of your support, for the fact that you hang with us and during our live streams, and that you've supported us all these years. So we want to say thank you, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope that you and your flock have a lot to be thankful for. Have a great one, and we'll see you soon.